Hello people, welcome back to Kayla Crates. I'm Kayla, and today I'm going to be talking about the 1983 Dungeons & Dragons cartoon that you probably didn't know existed. I'm really nervous to record this video because this is my third time trying. The first time I got completely done, I went back and looked at the footage and realized that I hated the camera angle, the lighting was not, I don't know, it just didn't look good. I just wasn't very confident in it, and especially for something like this, I would rather put out my best work than just be like, oh, it's fine, you know, yeah. Anyway, the second time I recorded, I went back to find all the clips, and half of them were missing, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, so I went back, looked through my camera, and my camera had split up half of the footage and, just deleted it. It was really, really weird. I don't know what happened, I'm kind of nervous to be recording right now, because it just randomly it'll turn off, and it's not that it's dead or anything or that it doesn't have memory, it just stops recording and turns off, and then I have to go and it's a whole thing. So if the camera angles change during this video, I am very sorry. I hope that doesn't get too annoying. So yeah, fun stuff. But anyway, Dungeons & Dragons. Really quickly, before I get too deep into this, I do want to put out a content warning. I don't really know how to explain why I'm going to be talking about this, but I will be touching on the Holocaust. I'm not going to get deep into it at all. I'm purposely keeping it very vague, but I do want to put a warning here, and I will be talking about it at the very end of the video. So you can stay until then if you want. Take care of yourself first. I just want to put this right at the very beginning. So my brother and I pretty much grew up on this show. My dad had DVDs of it that we would watch in the car for long drives, and so I've seen every episode probably 30 times at this point, if not more, and it never gets old. I love this show so much. I don't think I knew for a while that it was based on the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game. I thought maybe they made a game because the cartoon was so good or something. And full disclosure, I have never actually played the Dungeons & Dragons game myself. I've played 4 hours of it, and I don't really think that counts. So I'm not really here to comment on the similarities between the cartoon and the game. I know a couple of things, but I'm not going to sit here and break that down. In fact, there's actually not that much. It kind of took the concept of Dungeons & Dragons and made it its own story. So the main similarities are based on the creatures and monsters. Some of those include the Beholder, the Nightwalker, and the Skeleton Warrior, which is why I'm wearing this shirt. You could also argue that the main characters all have their own classes, I guess, although it's not exact, and we'll get into that in a minute. So the 1983 Dungeons & Dragons cartoon was created by Kevin Paul Coates, Dennis Marks, and some guy named Takashi, who I saw credited in a few places, and others it was just Coates and Marks. I could not find anything else about this Takashi person, but credit to them, I guess. So update, I watched the credits a little harder and I found out who this Takashi person is. They're credited as a screen designer, and that's it. And it also just says Takashi, no other name or anything. So we know a little bit more about them, I guess. Thanks, bud. So the premise of the story is explained to us in the intro sequence that plays at the beginning of every episode. We follow the protagonists as they get on the Dungeons & Dragons amusement park ride, and when they start riding, it gets all warpy and weird, and then they're all of a sudden in the realm of Dungeons & Dragons, being chased by Tiamat. And this is where we're introduced to the characters by name and weapon and everything. Dungeon Master appears and he gives them all individual weapons, and we'll talk about him in a minute. But first, there were 6 main characters. So first we have Hank the Ranger. He is the leader of the group, and his arrows can kind of shapeshift, I guess. I will just put a clip in here because I don't know how else to explain it. There's Bobby the Barbarian. He is the youngest and he wields a club. Presto the Magician, who is just what he sounds like. He's got a magical hat. He tries his best, but his magic kind of fails a lot of the time, and when it doesn't fail, it's usually a miraculous Don't ask me why I'm comparing it to Miraculous Ladybug, okay? But it reminds me of the Lucky Charm, where she's like, what am I gonna do with this? And then it actually ends up working out. That's what Presto does.
Rock-a-dannon! Turn my hat into a cannon! Hey, flower power!
There is Sheila the Thief, who's Bobby's older sister, and she has an invisibility cloak. Eric the Cavalier, who has a shield. He is the snobby rich guy, comedic relief, who can be good when he needs to be. And then there's Diana the Acrobat, who is smart and athletic. And I always thought her character was really cool because at least I didn't see a lot of black protagonists from this era of cartoons. Maybe I was just watching the wrong cartoons, but that was just my take on it. I thought she was cool. Also, her voice actress, Tanya Gale-Smith, Smith won an award for playing Diana, so that's really cool. So those are the characters that you could kind of argue kind of fit into classes. I think one of my friends told me that Sheila would probably be a bard, and then obviously there's Presto the sorcerer, and then Eric, I believe, would be a paladin, but that's pretty much where the similarities end. Alright, so those were our 6 main protagonists, and now we have the rest of our lineup. There is Uni, who is the animal sidekick. She's actually voiced by Frank Welker, who plays Fred in pretty much every single Scooby-Doo ever. Then we have Dungeon Master, who is their guide through the realm of Dungeons and Dragons. He is the one who gave the kids their weapons. He appears once or twice every episode to give the kids a very vague riddle and then disappear and leave them to figure it out on their own. And then we have Venger, the force of evil. He wants the kids' weapons to be able to become more powerful and like rule the realm or whatever, you know, very typical villain stuff. But not only does he want to take over the realm, he also wants to be powerful enough to defeat his father, the Dungeon Master. Woo, lore. All right. Now the cancellation. So it began in 1983 and canceled in 1985. It was canceled before the last episode could air, and it makes me want to cry. I'm gonna be real. It wasn't actually canceled due to any of the game controversy. As far as I could tell, the cartoon pretty much rose and fell in between the major controversies that, you know, made people think that D&D was a whole Satanism cult thing, whatever. This cartoon was apparently so controversial that it was canceled before they could air the final episode. And as far as I can tell, this final episode was going to be the very next one that they aired before it got canceled. It was actually canceled because a lot of parents thought that it was way too violent for their kids and it was way too scary. They couldn't even let them air the final episode, and it makes me want to cry. So of course the kids never get home, canonically, but like they kind of do, because here's the good part, is that an official script for the last episode was released, and so people have taken that and made fan animations of it and combined their own work with clips of the original TV show to make the final episode, and I am so happy that it exists. It's really well done, and I will be talking about that. There is one episode where the kids do contemplate killing Venger, so I can kind of see why parents were a little not happy about that. But other than that, I was like, why? That's so dumb. It's just people being weird and they just think that everything is violent, you know? But I rewatched that episode, and then I decided to rewatch the entire series, and then that's when I was kind of like, yeah, maybe this is a little bit dark for kids. Alright, so I'll be talking about 4 episodes today, which in my opinion are the darkest ones and the ones that definitely made me see why it got canceled. And I'm going to be breaking them down, going through the plot, just kind of explaining why it may have been a little bit dark. So I'm going to be going through these episodes kind of chronologically. The first 3 come like one right after the other, and then the last one that I want to talk about is the one where I'm going to mention the Holocaust. So again, timestamps up there and everything, but I do want to save that one for last. It just feels very disrespectful to talk about something very real and very awful like that, and then a couple minutes later be like, so the final episode in this cartoon, not gonna do that. So the first one I want to touch on is Season 2, Episode 16, The City at the Edge of Midnight. And yes, this is the child labor one. So it starts out with this poor little kid from the Earth Realm being dragged underneath his bed by an unknown force. And his dad comes running in the room, like flips over his bed, can't find him. He literally just gets sucked into the floor. So already I can see why that was a little bit terrifying for kids. And then we cut to our main characters in the Dungeons and Dragons realm. So Dungeon Master appears to the kids and tells them that they need to find the city at the edge of midnight, and that there are children there from both realms and that they might be able to find a way home. And while the kids are on their way to find the city, this man named Ramud comes and helps them like fight monsters or whatever.
Well, my friends, shall we not, how do you say, knock the monster's socks off?
I love his character, and he is played by Peter Cullen, who I forgot to mention in the beginning. Venger is also played by Peter Cullen. Yes, that Peter Cullen who plays Optimus Prime, and I love Optimus Prime, and I love Venger, and I love Ramud because he's a very wholesome person. So Ramud takes in all of the kids, and he lets them sleep in his tents. He like makes some food, he gets them all beds and everything, gets them situated, and they actually highly consider staying with him for forever because they're like, I don't know if we're gonna be able to get out of here, maybe we'll just stay with Ramud. And they're all sleeping peacefully when the clock strikes midnight and Bobby is pulled underneath his own bed into the floor and gets kidnapped. And Ramon comes in to help them and he says, I'm so sorry, this is the same thing that happened to my daughter actually. He mentioned before that he lost his daughter, I forgot to mention that. But he's like, this is what happened to her and I'm sorry, but there's no getting him back. There's nothing we can do. And obviously the kids aren't taking that. So they use all their weapons and combine forces to reopen up the portal and they get to the city at the edge of midnight that way. And when they get to the city, there's a big clock tower and they see it almost strike midnight before the hand goes back to 11:59. So they go into the clock tower and they see a bajillion kids. The reason that it's not striking midnight is because there's hundreds and hundreds of kids grinding the gears, physically making it stop. They're falling over from exhaustion and wearing brags. So yeah, child labor. So the Nightwalker's there. He explains that he kidnaps the kids because they keep time frozen. Our protagonists obviously save the day and they get the clock running again and they find Bobby and it's honestly really sweet. So then the clock finally strikes midnight and all the kids go back to their original realms. And it turns out that the kid kidnapped in the beginning of the episode actually knows our protagonist. And so they're like, hey, go back and tell our parents we're okay and we're trying to find home. And he's like, yeah, right, this is just a dream. I'm sure he'll be thinking that when his dad comes back in the room and is like, where the frick did you go, man? So everybody is transported back home. But our protagonists go back to Ramud's tent. They don't actually go home. I don't know if it's because they started calling that their home for a little bit or because it's the place they last slept, but they're sent back to Ramud's tent and so is Aisha. And so, they're all reunited. Fun stuff. Great. Obviously, the kids don't stay with Ramud. They keep trekking on, and Ramud gives them supplies. They continue their adventure. I always thought that episode was pretty crazy because child labor? I didn't actually really realize until just recently, So, for the next episode, The Dungeon at the Heart of Dawn. This was season 3, episode 1, and oh my gosh, was it a way to kick off season 3. So when I started this episode, I honestly thought it was episode 1. Very first episode, very first season, because it just felt so familiar. It was like deja vu. It was like, didn't I just barely watch this? But no, the reason I thought that I had just barely watched it is because it had awoken a very deep memory within me that was terrified of this episode. Further proving me wrong that, yeah, I can kind of see why parents are a little not happy to have their kids watching this. So the kids are searching in the ruins for the box of balefire because Dungeon Master told them to find it and bring it right to him. Eric is sick of his riddles and so he opens the box of balefire, thus releasing the ultimate evil. The worst of the worst evil that there possibly is. And it's dark and windy and stormy and Dungeon Master is panicked and then we see the vendors panicked and afraid and it's like, whoa, whoa, something the Dungeon Master and Venger are afraid of. So the creature approaches Venger and they seem to have a conversation. The ultimate evil just makes noises and Venger actually talks back to him. So you can't really hear the back and forth conversation, but Venger is speaking to him as if they're talking back and forth.
Welcome, Master. Failure. No, Master. No! Dungeon Master will fall before me. But I have not failed. I have earned no punishment.
So we know that Venger was once human and that he turned this way because he was bad, I guess. So my theory is that this Sauron-like being may have had a part in turning Venger into what he is now. And I will talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the next episode. So we go back to the kids. Dungeon Master is describing this thing.
Come on, Dungeon Master! Who is it? Or what is it?
His name is not for your ears, barbarian. He is not life as we know it. He has many identities on many different worlds, but all know him as evil. The ruler of many universes. But his goal is to rule the entire cosmos with evil. The instant before he strikes, he will reveal his face. No matter what happens, you must not look upon it. Transporting us all such a distance is rather fatiguing, I fear. It is.
Oh no! We're back where we started!
That thing's chased us all the way around the realm.
Where else can we run?
He has used all of his powers, teleporting them all across the entire realm. There's literally nowhere else to go. So he asks for a kid's weapons, and he uses his power and the weapon's power combined to teleport them to the underworld, because that's literally the only place they have left to go. Like, I'm telling you, this thing is freaking scary. This is apocalyptic. This scared me as a child, and now I can see why parents were wanting it canceled. So when they're in the underworld, he keeps like fading in and out of reality because he has no power left, and the kids need to take him to the dungeon at the Heart of Dawn so he can restore his powers. Now Avenger has the same idea. He also goes to the underworld, and he knows that the kids and Dungeon Master are going to be trying to get to the Heart of Dawn, so he's like, oh well, let me beat him, I'll stop him from doing that. And obviously Dungeon Master beats them to it, but to get back to the regular world or whatever, they have to use all of their powers combined, including Venger's, to do that. And so they all like, you know, rally up and they go back, and yeah, cool stuff. I just hate the concept of being the last person on Earth and being completely hopeless, you know what I mean? And I feel like that fear and deep unsettlement of those kinds of concepts probably started with this episode of Dungeons and Dragons. Alright, so now we are at the final episode. Again, I have one more episode to talk about after this, but the one that I'm about to talk about is canonically the final episode. So, like I said in the beginning, this show was canceled before they could even air this episode. It never saw the light of day, the kids never made it home, but they kind of did because the script is canon. So even though this episode was never fully, like, animated and voice acted and finally aired, there was still an official script released for it, like written by the actual writers and everything, like official, like real stuff. And it is online, it's easily accessible, and there's a group of people who took that official script and made it into the unofficial official last episode. There are some parts of the original voice acting and animation spliced in with the fanimation and fan voice acting. So I definitely didn't do a good job of explaining how the final episode came to be in my first recording, so I'm fixing that now. So Michael Reeves, who is a writer for a few of the episodes on D&D, got so many emails asking how it ended, and specifically a lot of emails asking him to prove or disprove the theory that the kids were actually in hell. So the theory goes that the kids had died on the ride and that they went to hell and Dungeon Master was the devil and they were in some kind of sick fantasy that they thought they'd be able to escape from but couldn't, which is absolutely not true, and I think it kind of triggered him, honestly, so he released the script to prove them all wrong, and apparently it was left open-ended in case of a fourth season, which obviously we know didn't happen. In total, he wrote 8 episodes for the show. The ones that he wrote were a lot darker than the rest, in my opinion. So along comes Marshall Hubbard, and he was a fan of the show when he was a kid, and he showed it to his kids, and his kids started asking if the Dungeons and Dragons characters ever made it home. He looked online and expected to find a fanfiction or something, and instead he actually found Michael Reeves' blog. He, at the time, was in a Facebook group for, like, just discussing the cartoon, and he made a post asking for help to animate the final episode, and Ryan Need was interested, and so Ryan helped him put together the final episode and animate it. The only thing about the script that they really changed was, like I said, it was left open-ended, and so they went back and kind of revised that a little bit, because now obviously we know that the show didn't keep going, but other than that, it's like word for word the script. There's also a really great podcast done by Shane Plays where he interviews Ryan Need and Marshall Hubbard, and it's a really awesome podcast. It's really thorough, and it was so interesting to hear all these kinds of technical things that they, you know, had to consider. It's so interesting, and I definitely recommend going and giving it a listen. And also, Katie Lee, who played Sheila in the original, came back to play Sheila in the remake. So the final episode is on the Zatavio DeLorean YouTube channel, and I will of course link everything below. Again, go check it out. It's so awesome. I love it so much, and I'm sure that they won't be listening to this, but thank you, Ryan and Marshall, for making my childhood dreams come true. So it starts out with Venger and Dungeon Master kind of like meeting up and talking, and Venger says that he has a way for the kids to get home and he will allow it to happen if they can find a key without any help from Dungeon Master. And Dungeon Master agrees to it because he obviously believes them, and he's like, they'll be able to figure it out without me, but that means that he has to abandon them, which causes a lot of strife between the group. Venger comes to them and he's like, hey, I know Dungeon Master isn't helping you out, but I can, and all you guys have to do is find this key, and it's in like this tower somewhere. Hank, Diana, and Bobby don't want to trust Venger, and so they go off and they're gonna try and figure it out on their own. In the other half, Presto, Eric, and Sheila decide, like, what other choice do we have, and so they go after the key. But Hank, Diana, and Bobby know that they're gonna go after the key, and so like, well, we better beat them there, and so they just end up in the same tower in the end after all. So when they get to the room that they're supposed to find the key in, they see a tomb with a human Venger on it, and they move the lid off, and inside is the key. Shenanigans ensue. Both Dungeon Master and Venger show up, and Eric ends up with the key. Venger keeps telling him to throw it into the abyss, and Eric remembers Dungeon Master saying that all things have a purpose here, including your presence. So Eric uses the key to open the door, and something happens to Venger. So earlier in the episode, Diana had this theory. The theory was the entire realm of Dungeons & Dragons was a dungeon, and this is just pretty much confirmed by everybody being sent home. So Venger turns back into a human, and the kids realize that they were there not to defeat Venger, but to redeem him, because Dungeon Master couldn't do it himself. And now that that's done and over with, they can go back home.
So I don't know if my camera deleted this part or if I just made an editing mistake, but basically when Venger turns back into a human, there's a bunch of like blue beams of light that appear everywhere, and they open up a bajillion portals, and then everybody like runs back home.
So Dungeon Master opens up the portal for them. They all want to go home, but they're like, hey, you're still welcome to call us whenever you need us. So obviously they all go home except for Presto. Presto wants to stay in the realm and learn how to become a real magician from Venger. You do you, buddy. So the rest of their weapons disappear. Presto and Venger go to meet this girl named Varla that you met earlier in the series. This part is so funny to me because there's a little bit of a love interest between Presto and Varla. So when he goes to meet Varla, I'm pretty sure Venger like slaps him on the back or something, and he's like, the first lesson is to never keep a lady waiting.
First lesson, apprentice. Never keep a lady waiting.
And it's just I just can't. I can't. Oh yeah, and Uni stays with Presto, by the way. Forgot to mention that. But the rest of the kids go home. We don't actually get to see them like meet their parents or anything, but you do see their silhouettes at the mouth of the dragon of the ride. So that's fun. They're home now. About time, because we didn't get to see it for forever. It wasn't even aired, and it literally makes me want to cry. So that's the finale of the series. Even if you haven't seen the rest of the series, I definitely recommend giving that one a watch. Again, links below, because it's really well done. It's just really impressive and really awesome how these other people were able to take it and make it into like pretty much a real thing. So go watch it. It's really good. So I do have one more episode to talk about, and this is the part where I will be talking about the Holocaust. I'll be very vague. I'm not going to go into any detail, but if you just don't want to hear anything about it at all, leave, go away. Like, don't do that to yourself. Let's just get into it. So this was the second episode of season 3, episode 23 total, called The Time Lost. And the episode begins with a man flying an 80s aircraft from Earth. And he comes through the portal into the Dungeons and Dragons realm, and the kids see that it's an Earth aircraft, and they think that maybe that's their way home. They try and get to him and figure out like where to go and, you know, what happened and everything.
So I read more comments on this episode, and apparently the first pilot dude is supposed to be Ace from G.I. Joe.
Now I'm under attack by some guy in a dress riding a flying horse.
So I don't know, I just thought that was worth mentioning. Just in case.
Venger beats the kids to this pilot, and he throws the pilot in a cell with a bunch of other people from different time periods and different countries. So Shadow Demon, who is Venger's right-hand man, asks why not this guy? What's wrong with him? And Venger says he's from the wrong time and the wrong place, just like the others.
Might not he be the one you seek?
No, Shadow Demon. He comes from the wrong time and the wrong country, like the others. I require a warrior from a very specific time, before Dungeon Master's young ones were born. A time when their world was torn by war. This Shadow Demon is the proper place and time.
So now the portal starts to open again, and a 40s aircraft comes through, and Venger sees it and is like, this is the one. So this time the kids beat Venger to the pilot. They help him out of his aircraft just in case he's hurt. And he introduces himself as Josef. He speaks in a German accent and is blonde-haired and blue-eyed. So they ask him where the portal is, and he's like, that way. They all go. He stays behind for a minute, but they go back and they grab him and they're like, come on, we're all going home. So the camera stays on the aircraft for a little bit, and the smoke smoke pulls back and reveals the symbol of the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force. And the symbol is called the Balkenkreuz. The Balkenkreuz. So as they go and find the portal, Yosef tells them that he just flew into the world from the middle of battle, and they're like, what battle? What do you mean? And then they make a comment on how old his plane is, and he's like, what are you talking about? That's brand new. That's state of the art. And Hank is like, no, they haven't made airplanes like that for like 35, 40 years. He finally realizes, wait a minute, these kids don't know where I came from or who I am. So Yosef runs to the river to take off his jacket and pull off his armband, which also has the symbol of the Balkenkreuz. And what he says next to the river, I don't know why, but it breaks my heart, and it's really sweet at the same time.
What a blessing! A new beginning in a new world.
So he thinks that none of the kids saw him do that, but they do. They see the symbol float away and they realize, oh, you are fighting in World War II right now, aren't you? And he explains, yeah, I am part of the German war. I'm from 1945, but I just want to be free. And the kids just invite him in and they're like, well, if we're going home, you're coming with us.
I do not wish to be your enemy, only to be free of that horrible war and the tyrant who caused it.
You are free now, Yosef.
And when we find that portal, you're coming home with us.
Yeah, for a personally guided tour of our time, the future.
So eventually Venger captures Yosef and he brings him to the 80s aircraft that he's gotten and fixed up and everything. And he tells Yosef, hey, I will give you this aircraft if you bring me the kids. I will give you this one. This has futuristic technology. This will help your country win the war and it'll all be over and you don't have to worry about fighting anymore. And the reason Venger wants Germany to win the war so bad is because he thinks that if Germany wins, the kids will never exist, or they at least won't be able to, have their weapons and everything. Bunch of time travel jazz. Yosef gets in the 80s plane, but he, of course, doesn't actually betray the kids. He actually flies into the giant blue orb that's creating the portals. Plane crashes, explodes, and he uses the parachute to go back into the portal to the war, because now he knows that it's going to be over someday and that they're not going to win and that it's gonna get better. He jumps back through that portal knowing that Germany is going to lose and completely okay with that, wanting Germany to lose. And I think that's really important because not all Nazis were bad. Not all Germans were bad. Really quick though, I just want to read this comment on the video that I watched on. I just think it's cute. This is from @TheodoreCarter6601. What if when the kids return home, they meet Yosef again? Maybe they'll find him as an old man in a retirement home or something. Maybe learn that he soon defected from the Nazis, joined the Allies, and soon migrated to America, where he settled down and started a family. Then he would recognize the kids when they visit him as the young kids who help him defeat a tyrant, Venger. The nurses would dismiss it as him misremembering things due to dementia, but the kids would know what it means. I bet Diana would be dismayed at first to find him an old man, but kind of happy he found peace after the war. And you know what? I think so too. I'm gonna pretend that that's canon. Now, I know I'm probably gonna get ripped for analyzing a cartoon this deeply, mostly by my family members, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I think that this episode is so important because, I think we can all agree that World War II was probably the darkest time in history, pretty much ever, and this episode caused me to look into the good Nazis of the war. And especially in these days, I think that if we can latch on to a little bit of faith for humanity, and I know I can't speak for everybody here, but in my experience learning about the war, it was all of these people were terrible people, and yeah, a lot of them were terrible people. And again, this is just me, maybe other people have had completely different experiences, but I wish that I had been taught that there are still good people in the darkest of times. And seeing this episode led me down a path of researching a lot of actually fairly uplifting stories. I wouldn't call them completely uplifting because it did happen during the Holocaust, and I don't really know if I'm reading too deeply into this or not deep enough, because it was kind of a random thing to happen in a TV show like Dungeons and Dragons. But again, that's why I'm so deeply analyzing it, is because it's so random for something like that to happen in Dungeons and Dragons. Why is it there? And I couldn't find a lot of interviews or anything about why this specific episode was made. I have to imagine that there was just a deeper message the writers were trying to tell. So something that I found out after recording is that Michael Reeves, who wrote this episode, and I think actually all of the other episodes that I've talked about in this video, he liked to put in a lot of hidden messages and symbolism in what he wrote. So I definitely don't think it's too far out of the question to analyze any of his writing as deeply as I am right now. Which I thought so, but just making sure. Again, I just wish I had realized a little bit more and learned about the stories of good people in the war. And if this is the way that I start learning about it, then this is the way that I start learning about it, through a cartoon episode. I just think that it's important to realize that so many Germans, so many Nazis also wanted the war to end. I mean, it's like the frog in boiling water metaphor. So many people joined the Nazi party and the German military because there was a promise for a brighter future, a promise to restore the country to its former glory, and it was very gradual but also very, very fast. Within months, all of a sudden, it wasn't just restoring the country to its former glory, it was all these concepts of the master race and the Holocaust and concentration camps. But like I said, this episode led me down a path of researching the good Nazis of the war, and I want to talk about a couple of them today. There was Karl Plage, who passed out real working permits to Jews to keep them from being sent to the concentration camps. The other person I want to talk about is Dr. Hans Munch, or Munk. I'm not quite sure on the pronunciation, but he was known as the good man of Auschwitz. So he worked as a doctor of Auschwitz right alongside Josef Mengele, the angel of death. And if you know anything about Dr. Mengele, that is incredibly terrifying. And he was nothing like Dr. Mengele. So this is where gets a tiny bit more graphic, but again, I'm gonna try and go into as little detail as possible. But just warning here, people under these doctors' care would be disposed of as soon as they were considered useless. And Dr. Munch would make up these random excuses for why they couldn't get rid of his patients yet. He was forced, he had no choice but to be a doctor in Auschwitz, but he did the bare minimum in a good way. He would often falsely report a lot of good and promising results so he could, in a good way, prolong his patients' lives, and he would sneak food to the prisoners of Auschwitz. He helped a lot of prisoners escape, and he did all of this at the risk of his own life. Dr. Munch was also the only person out of dozens and dozens of other Nazis to be acquitted of all charges because he had so many people testify in his favor and say he didn't do any of this stuff to us. He was actually a good person. And again, I know it's just a cartoon, but if a cartoon can make me think this seriously and this deeply about something as heavy as this, maybe I'm just crazy, but I still think that that speaks volumes to what dumb cartoons are able to do. I don't know, I just think that it's really amazing that a cartoon led me down this rabbit hole. Alright, that's it. I know that was heavy, but I wanted to talk about it. I felt like it was important to recognize those stories. That's all I have for you guys today. I highly encourage you guys to go watch specifically that fan-made episode, and definitely watch The Time Lost if you can. I will have links to the playlists and the videos below. Thank you guys for being patient with me. I know that I have mentioned this video a couple of times, and then I was like, just kidding, it's not coming out. So thank you guys for sticking with me. I've also gotten a pretty good handful of new subscribers over the past couple of months. It's probably been like 10 total or something, but for me that's a lot, so thank you guys. I don't do this to get likes and comments and subscribers and view time and money and whatever. I just do it because I genuinely love to make videos, so it really does mean a lot that other people are also enjoying something that I enjoy. But other than that, that is all I had for you guys today. Thank you for watching. I genuinely really appreciate it. Stay safe and stay healthy, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!